The interview was meant to feel warm and personal. Every detail of the living room had been carefully arranged to create a relaxed atmosphere, but from the moment the cameras started rolling, something felt off. It wasn't the furniture, the lighting, or the production. It was the energy between Savannah Guthrie and Meghan Markle. A quiet tension hung in the air that became impossible to ignore. Savannah, a veteran journalist with decades of experience, approached the conversation the same way she had approached countless interviews before, with calm, thoughtful questions and a respectful tone. Yet Meghan's responses didn't seem to match the warmth of her smile. While her expressions remained composed, Savannah sensed hesitation beneath the polished exterior. Years of interviewing politicians, celebrities, and ordinary people had taught her to recognize when words and emotions failed to align. The atmosphere shifted when Savannah gently brought up Meghan's father, Thomas Markle. Rather than asking an aggressive question, she simply referred to his recent emergency surgery and the public statements in which he expressed a desire to reconnect with his daughter before it was too late. Meghan responded by describing their relationship as complicated, carefully choosing her words. Savannah listened closely before offering a personal reflection. Having recently endured heartbreaking family challenges herself, she spoke about how painful loss can change a person's perspective on time and relationships. She explained that life often provides no warning before loved ones are gone forever, making reconciliation impossible. Looking directly at Meghan, she asked what was preventing her from reaching out while her father was still alive and openly seeking contact. Meghan answered that trust had been broken before her wedding, referring to the controversy involving staged photographs years earlier. Savannah acknowledged the hurt, but gently questioned whether 6 years of complete estrangement remained a proportional response. Her tone stayed calm, but her questions became more direct as she encouraged Meghan to consider how she might feel in the future if reconciliation never happened. The conversation grew increasingly emotional. Meghan shifted in her seat, occasionally pausing before answering and reaching for a glass of water. Savannah wasn't attempting to create conflict, but she continued asking thoughtful follow-up questions whenever answers felt incomplete. She wondered whether unresolved family disputes sometimes become harder to justify as time passes, especially when aging parents face serious health problems. When Meghan suggested that the topic was deeply personal, Savannah reminded her that the interview itself was intended to explore her personal story. Since her relationship with her father had become part of the public narrative, Savannah explained that it was reasonable for viewers to seek greater understanding. The discussion then turned toward Meghan and Prince Harry's upcoming visit to Britain for the Invictus Games countdown event. Savannah noted that only months earlier, Harry had expressed concerns about bringing Meghan and their children to the United Kingdom because of security issues. She asked what had changed to make the visit possible now. Meghan replied simply that circumstances had evolved, offering few additional details. Although the interview remained professional throughout, the growing contrast between Savannah's persistent search for clarity and Meghan's measured responses created an atmosphere that viewers found compelling. By the end of the conversation, it was clear that the interview had become less about headlines and more about difficult questions surrounding family, accountability, and the choices people make when faced with unresolved relationships. The discussion then shifted to Meghan and Prince Harry's upcoming visit to the United Kingdom. Savannah referred to previous public statements in which Harry had expressed serious concerns about returning with his family because of security issues. Now that plans for a visit had been announced, Savannah wanted to understand what had changed. "What evolved?" she asked. "Either the security concerns made a visit impossible, or they didn't. What changed?" Meghan responded carefully, saying that circumstances had developed over time and that several factors had contributed to the decision. Savannah pressed for greater clarity, pointing out that Harry had previously suggested members of the royal family had made returning difficult. Reports now indicated that those same family members were helping facilitate the visit. "If relationships have improved," Savannah asked, "were any of the earlier accusations addressed? Was there an apology or some form of reconciliation?" Meghan replied that family conversations were private. Savannah acknowledged that privacy was important, but noted that many of the disagreements had already been discussed publicly by Harry himself. She suggested that when public criticism is made, people naturally wonder whether any effort has been made to resolve those disagreements. Meghan simply answered that the family was focused on moving forward. The interview then turned toward Meghan's business ventures. Savannah mentioned reports surrounding changes in Meghan's professional partnerships and asked how those relationships had evolved. Meghan described the situation as a natural difference in creative vision, explaining that partnerships sometimes develop in unexpected ways. Savannah recognized the familiar language often used in corporate communications and gently encouraged Meghan to explain the situation in more concrete terms. "What actually happened?" Savannah asked. "What lessons did you take away from the experience?" Meghan maintained that creative differences were common in business and that not every collaboration produced the intended results. Savannah noted that several media reports had described concerns about project delivery and working relationships, asking whether there was any truth behind those accounts. Rather than addressing the reports directly, Meghan emphasized that media coverage often presents only part of the story. Savannah accepted that perspective, but observed that when multiple outlets describe similar issues, people naturally become curious about whether there is a consistent pattern. The conversation continued with questions about another high-profile media partnership. Savannah asked how Meghan viewed criticism that some projects had produced less content than many observers expected. Meghan responded that she had fulfilled her contractual responsibilities and that creative disagreements had influenced production decisions. Savannah acknowledged that business partnerships sometimes fail despite good intentions, but she wondered whether audiences and business partners often judge success by results rather than contractual obligations alone. Meghan repeated that every agreement had been honored according to its terms. Next, Savannah asked about reports concerning a leadership retreat where attendees had expected extensive interaction with Meghan after paying premium registration fees. Meghan explained that her participation had always been limited and that she fulfilled every commitment outlined in her agreement. Savannah responded that while contractual obligations may have been satisfied, public expectations appeared to differ from what participants ultimately experienced. She suggested that businesses share responsibility for ensuring promotional materials accurately reflect what customers will receive. As the interview entered its final stage, Savannah shifted away from individual controversies and spoke more broadly about communication. Drawing on decades of interviewing world leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people during life's most difficult moments, she reflected on the qualities she had come to associate with authentic conversations. She explained that genuine responses often include specific details, thoughtful reflection, and a willingness to engage directly with uncomfortable questions. Looking across the room, she observed that many of Meghan's answers relied on broad statements about privacy, creative differences, or evolving circumstances rather than addressing the issues in detail. Savannah concluded by noting that viewers often recognize the difference between carefully managed public messaging and deeply personal conversation. Whether discussing family relationships or professional setbacks, she suggested that people are usually searching for honesty, accountability, and clear explanations rather than carefully rehearsed language. The conversation had grown noticeably heavier. Every answer seemed to lead to another difficult question, and the atmosphere in the room became increasingly tense. Savannah leaned forward, maintaining a calm expression despite the rising discomfort. "I'm looking for genuine engagement," she said. "What I'm hearing instead sounds carefully managed." Meghan remained composed. "I have been genuine." "Genuine and strategic aren't always the same thing," Savannah replied. "Sometimes people answer honestly, other times they answer in ways designed to protect an image." For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. Savannah reflected on how personal hardship can reshape the way people view honesty and vulnerability. She explained that painful experiences had taught her to recognize the difference between carefully prepared statements and deeply personal reflection. The discussion then shifted towards social media. Savannah mentioned reports that Meghan had sent a gift package and handwritten note to a prominent online personality who was known for criticizing members of the royal family. She asked whether sending such a gift could be interpreted as endorsing the individual's public commentary. Meghan answered that gifts were occasionally sent to people who supported her brand, and that no broader meaning should be attached to the gesture. Savannah acknowledged the explanation but wondered whether public figures inevitably communicate priorities through the people they choose to recognize. "People notice patterns," she said. "Whether intended or not, every public decision sends a message." Meghan maintained that the gift had been a routine business decision and nothing more. The interview moved to another topic. Savannah referenced criticism surrounding a recent speech about artificial intelligence. Some commentators had questioned whether the polished language sounded overly generic and wondered how much of the speech had been written personally. Meghan responded that every public address reflected her own ideas, although she worked with a team during the writing process. Savannah asked whether she personally drafted the speech or collaborated extensively with advisors. "I don't separate creativity into percentages," Meghan replied. Savannah smiled politely. "Most speakers simply say they wrote it themselves or worked with editors," she observed. Audiences are often curious about that process. The exchange had become increasingly uncomfortable. Meghan reached for her handbag before quietly saying, "This interview is becoming very different from what I expected." "You agreed to an honest conversation," Savannah answered. "These are the kinds of questions viewers naturally ask. They concern your public projects, your public statements, and your public decisions." Meghan felt the questioning had become overly confrontational. Savannah disagreed. "Journalists ask difficult questions every day," she said. "Public figures aren't expected to answer everything perfectly, but they are expected to explain decisions that affect public perception." The conversation turned briefly to privacy. Meghan argued that some subjects deserve to remain private despite public interest. Savannah acknowledged that everyone has a right to personal boundaries, but noted that balancing privacy with a highly public life often creates complicated expectations. Audiences naturally wonder why some experiences are shared openly while others are considered off-limits. As the interview drew toward its conclusion, Meghan stood and slowly walked toward the exit. "I expected something different," she said quietly. Savannah rose as well. "I think you expected a conversation with fewer difficult questions," she replied. "My responsibility isn't to reinforce anyone's narrative. It's to seek clarity." Meghan paused near the doorway. "People don't always know everything someone has lived through," she said. "That's true," Savannah answered. "None of us can fully understand another person's private experiences. We can only discuss what has been presented publicly." She continued thoughtfully. "Public life brings extraordinary opportunities, but it also brings scrutiny. Success isn't measured only by accomplishments. It's measured by how people respond to criticism, setbacks, and difficult conversations. Those moments often shape public perception more than any prepared statement." For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Meghan nodded politely before leaving the room. The door closed softly behind her. Savannah returned to her chair, took a slow breath, and looked toward the cameras. "I think it's important," she said, "to explain why conversations like this matter. Journalism isn't about winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's about asking fair questions, seeking clear answers, and allowing viewers to decide for themselves." Savannah remained seated after the interview ended, the silence in the studio lingering long after the door had closed. She took a slow breath before looking toward the camera. "I've been doing this for many years," she began. "I've interviewed presidents, entertainers, athletes, survivors of unimaginable hardship, and families living through the darkest moments of their lives. Every interview is different because every person is different." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "What happened here today felt different. Not because difficult questions were asked, but because meaningful answers never seemed to arrive. She reflected on the conversation that had just unfolded. Whenever I asked about difficult decisions, the responses became broader. Whenever I asked about setbacks, the focus shifted elsewhere. Whenever I explored complicated relationships, the conversation turned toward privacy. Those are valid choices, but they also leave important questions unanswered. Savannah folded her hands together. One lesson journalism teaches you is that people reveal themselves in many ways. Sometimes it's through what they say. Sometimes it's through what they choose not to say. She explained that personal hardship has a way of changing perspective. When life reminds you how fragile time really is, your priorities become remarkably clear. You stop worrying about appearances. You stop rehearsing perfect answers. You begin valuing honesty, relationships, and the moments that can't be replaced. She looked directly into the lens. Every family has disagreements. Every public figure faces criticism. Every career includes failures. None of those things define a person. What matters is how someone responds when they're asked to reflect on those experiences. Savannah emphasized that journalism was never meant to be comfortable. The purpose of an interview isn't to confirm a public image. It's to explore it. Sometimes that means asking questions people would rather avoid. Those moments often reveal more than prepared statements ever could. She smiled gently. I don't expect perfect answers. I don't expect people to have every solution. I simply hope for sincerity. The cameras continued rolling as she gathered her thoughts. When someone speaks openly about difficult chapters in life, audiences can usually sense authenticity. Specific memories, honest reflection, even uncertainty can create genuine connection. Carefully managed language, on the other hand, often leaves viewers feeling they still don't know the person sitting in front of them. She paused once more. Today's conversation reminded me that authenticity isn't something you can manufacture. It comes from being willing to acknowledge mistakes, accept uncomfortable questions, and trust that honesty is stronger than image. Savannah leaned back slightly. Public life comes with extraordinary opportunities, but it also comes with accountability. The two are inseparable. If someone chooses to share parts of their story publicly, it's reasonable for audiences to ask thoughtful questions about that story. Her expression softened. I've learned that compassion and accountability aren't opposites. You can treat someone with kindness while still expecting honest answers. In fact, I believe that's exactly what good journalism requires. The studio remained quiet. She concluded with a final observation. Conversations don't have to end in agreement to be valuable. They simply have to be real. When people engage openly, even during disagreement, viewers gain understanding. When every difficult question is met with distance or carefully prepared language, that opportunity disappears. Savannah offered one last smile before the cameras prepared to cut away. That's why journalism matters. Not because it produces perfect endings, but because it gives people the chance to ask important questions, listen carefully to the answers, and allow the audience to reach its own conclusions. In the end, honesty is never about winning an interview. It's about creating a conversation worth remembering.